This message is one of hope and rising above the ashes, which is a message that a lot of us may resonate with or may find helpful during these troubled times. And that is partly one reason why this workshop is held today on an Easter Monday. A little bit about me. Well, I'm a psychologist by training, so I had my master's degree in human development psychology in the Philippines, and I also was a neuropsychologist for 7 years prior to migrating to Canada. In my current role, my title is Caregiver Wellness Coordinator, but basically in essence, it's more around research and education. Okay. Aside from this, aside from being a psychologist by training, I want to let you know that I too was a caregiver, or I too am a caregiver. First, I was a caregiver to my dad who lived with a form of COPD. I also was a long distance caregiver to my grandma who lived with Alzheimer's disease. And currently I'm a caregiver, another, long distance caregiver to my mom who has breast cancer. Being a caregiver myself, I understand the many struggles that daily caregiving brings. And in addition to our already full plate, the uncertainty of the times bring on added stress. Perhaps you're caring for someone infected with the virus, or maybe you're caring for someone with mental health challenges, or living with a form of chronic or progressive disease like dementia, and they may lack the ability to comprehend the gravity of the situation we're in. Routines may be disrupted, and supports that we may already be receiving have been suspended or interrupted. These are truly difficult times. But in our short time together, I just want to touch base with each one of you to show that we at SCHC care about your plight. I also want to briefly remind everyone that you are not alone, and that even though our current situation presents us with so many unknowns that seem to be beyond us, there are things that we still can control, and I hope that through this short presentation, you may be able to rise above the crosses and the burdens you may now be facing. What I am sharing with you today are not my original ideas. I just want to make that clear. These are concepts, suggestions, and recommendations from the respected and credible organizations here and abroad. I listed them here on the slide, as you can see, but towards the end, you will find a reference page which you can go back to later. If you have the time, you can click the link. I can also share with you the presentation if you want. You can click the link and go back to the articles that I used as references. Okay. What I did for this presentation is I have tried to gather as much information as I can and tried my very best to break it down into something that is simpler and easier to understand. Just as everyone is sticking with the essentials nowadays, our aim for this presentation is to do the same. Instead of bombarding you with more information and difficult to understand concepts or psychological concepts, our theme will simply revolve around what I call the ABCs of caregiver wellness and build from that using our very own experiences as caregivers and care providers. But first things first, okay? Remember, during these times, it's important to keep ourselves safe and healthy. Okay, you know the drill. I don't need to rehash all of these. Just make sure you practice, proper hand washing, cleaning, etc. So here in front of you is a caregiver handout published or released by Public Health Ontario. You may find and download this resource just in case you want, to review it or you don't have a copy. Please find this resource by clicking this web link that you see on the slide, or feel free to reach out to me after this workshop and I will email you a copy. Okay, so this past Tuesday, April 7, we here in Canada celebrated what we call the National Caregivers Day. This is to honor all caregivers who selflessly give of themselves to care for another's well-being, and in behalf of SCHC, I'd like to thank you. Let's begin our discussion by taking a closer look at caregivers and the important roles they play, or the important roles you play. Over the last decade, healthcare in Ontario has increasingly become more community and home-based, with shorter hospital stays and an increased focus on home care services. In most cases, a family member or a friend is also likely providing some kind of care and support at different stages in their healthcare journey. The supports that our caregivers provide range from emotional support, transportation, housekeeping, to performing clinical tasks such as tube feeding, wound care, and giving injections. At this point, I think it is just sufficient to say that the supports they give to both their families and the healthcare system in general is immense. However, it's sad that their contribution, or your contribution, is not well recognized and valued as much as they should. So as a result, many caregivers feel it is a lonely job, and they feel abandoned, especially in the beginning of their caregiver journey. Their well-being is not considered early on and in a proactive way. According to the Change Foundation, in the research that they had conducted in 2016, they said that caregiving has health implications for many caregivers. As you can see here in this slide, again, this is from the report of the Change Foundation in 2016, or released in 2016. They said that among the caregivers that they interviewed, 47% of them, or 1.6 million caregivers, report having some level of stress that stem from their caregiving duties. And stress is one of the main contributors to their ill health. More specifically, their psychological health is negatively affected by providing care and stress from caregiving, and this puts them at serious risk for poor physical outcomes. This information, meanwhile, comes from the website of the Family Caregiver Alliance. Okay. So did any of those research findings that I just presented resonate with you? Okay. Those research results were from previous years, okay, way before this worldwide pandemic happened, which makes me all the more wonder and be concerned about the state of caregivers like you in such a time as this. From all these, we gather that caregiving duties and stresses brought about by caregiving affects the caregiver's overall health and well-being, which is how the World Health Organization defined wellness. For our purposes, I would like to use and share with you the wellness definition of UC Davis. It's a school on their Student Health and Counseling Services webpage, as I feel it's more relevant to our topic for today. How they defined wellness is this: it is an active process of becoming aware of and making choices towards a healthy and fulfilling life. They said wellness is more than being free from illness. It is a dynamic process of change and growth. Any thoughts about these two definitions, or anything jumping out of the page for you? So we see from these definitions, wellness is beyond being free of illness. And to make it more relevant, it is beyond being COVID-19 free. We also gather from all these that the different dimensions of health interact with each other, in that psychological health, which includes our emotional and mental state, can be affected or be affected by our physical health. So you see, in these scenarios, we are battling not only the unseen virus called COVID-19, but many of the unseen quote unquote viruses that affect our well being, like fears, worries, anger, etc. Can you name some of these unseen viruses? So, if you want to share your thoughts on this question, feel free to turn on your microphones with me, or you can also type them in our meeting chat or our chat box. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing your, what you're going through or, what's on your mind. So we'll start now discussing the ABCs of caregiver wellness. Again, just want to emphasize that this ABCs of caregiver wellness is something that I've put together. You can't find it in any medical or evidence-based journals, but this ABCs of caregiver wellness is based on evidence-based research and articles around psychological health and well-being, especially of caregivers. Okay, so the ABCs of caregiver wellness are the following. So I said with A, okay, we are going to talk about what we call active awareness and acceptance, which is very important. Okay, we also will be talking about beliefs. Okay, we're also going to talk about C, and under C, we're going to cover choice and control. Okay, I might be including this section in the area around active awareness and acceptance. Then C also is around caring for yourself and building that what we call circle of care or circle of care supports. Okay, which is also another very integral part of wellness, caregiver wellness. D is talking about drawing upon your resilience. Okay, that's one of the things that we're going to talk about shortly. And lastly, E is around expectations. Okay, so we'll go first to the first basic concept of caregiver wellness, and that is around active awareness, acceptance, choice, and control. As I said, I'm going to include choice and control in this section. Okay, so I have here, in this slide, you can see a quote from an article where I gathered this information. It's from Mental Health Commission of Canada, and it's a very recent publication in light of COVID-19. So they said the sooner we accept the things we cannot control, the more energy we'll have for the things we can. And I just decided I thought this is a relevant graphic, so I included the Serenity Prayer in this slide. Okay, so you might observe that control is at a premium right now because we're surrounded by so many unknowns and what ifs. The sooner we accept the things that we cannot control, again, the more energy we'll have for the things we can. And that's based on neuroscience as well, right? As a caregiver, this might mean accepting that your routine with the person you care for isn't possible within the constraints of public health measures, and finding a more flexible routine might be necessary. It might also mean accepting that you don't know how long physical distancing measures will last, and focusing on connecting by phone or reassuring your loved one that the separation is just temporary. Okay? But more than our present day circumstances brought about by COVID-19, our daily life in general and as a caregiver presents us with issues that require us to choose between acceptance and control. To put some order into our lives that have been filled with changes and challenges, we try to exert as much control as we can. Example, we can control our spending habits to save money from all our caregiving expenses. We can also control what we eat so that we don't get sick, and then there's so many others for sure that you may have experienced control in your life, or you tried to exert control in your life. Control brings order into chaos. Do you agree? While we want to control everything as much as we can, realistically, we can't. Have you ever wondered why our palms, okay, or our hands by default are in an open position rather than balled up in a fist? Well, balling up in a fist signifies control, tight rein, fighting, right? In my opinion, it is designed that way because it is exhausting, and realistically, it's impossible to exert control all the time. Hence, we need to be more aware of our situation. To be mindful of what our present circumstances are, we need to identify what our specific problem is and break it down into smaller components or simpler components. We also need to define what our pressing problems are and be able to problem solve and tease out what can we control and what we can't. Sometimes writing it down helps. In the next slide, I can show you a sample journal, by the way. We also need to be aware of our reactions and our actions. Are we becoming increasingly tense, for example? If we do, for example, what are we doing with our tension upon realizing, the feeling or the emotion? Do we just freeze up, panic, cry maybe? Or do we start to mobilize ourselves into action that will hopefully help towards solving our problems? I just want to take this opportunity to share with you some of my life experiences as a caregiver, as I mentioned. So, earlier I said I used to be a caregiver for my dad, and I struggled with acceptance and control, most especially when I took care of my dad as a long distance caregiver. Being in Canada, being myself in Canada, and my parents were or are in the Philippines, these presented extra challenges for me in this area. It was hard for me to accept that my dad, who used to be my pillar of strength, was slowly deteriorating. And I was a daddy's girl, and being a healthcare professional myself, I wanted the very best for him and my mom. So I tried my best to be in control of everything, and this ended in conflicts with my family, with my mom, uh, my husband most especially. It drained me physically, emotionally, and financially, as I had to fly to the Philippines at least once or twice every year. Despite all my efforts at control, nothing improved. My dad continually declined, and only when I learned to let go did it become easy for my family and my dad to let go too. Another thing that helped me through the difficult times in my life as a caregiver was my faith, or is my faith in God. And that will lead us shortly to another equally important point around caregiver wellness, which is around beliefs. Before we talk about that, as I promised, I just want to quickly show you a tool that will help you around the area of awareness, acceptance, and control. Okay, so here's the sample worksheet, which you can easily do on your own if you have your own journal, or just get any piece of paper, but make sure you keep the piece of paper later for review. I encourage you to reflect and write down the following. Number one, all your problems and concerns, put them on paper. Okay, so that it's no longer in your mind, but it's on paper. Okay, you can see it. It's something that's concrete. Okay, in a way, writing it down is cathartic. It helps you release those pent up emotions. Okay, and it also gives you something to see, something to visualize, so that when you start sorting out, right, what you can and cannot control, it's going to be very helpful. Okay, so that's for A, acceptance. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, so if there's none, I'm going to move to the next. Okay, and this is around beliefs. Okay, so belief can take many forms. It can be a belief in a supreme being or someone that we call God. It can also be self-belief. In more psychological terms, this is known as self-efficacy beliefs, or this is your belief in yourself, your ability to succeed in specific situations, or or in accomplishing a task. Okay, so in psychology, there are 3 levels of coping. Okay, when we say coping, this refers to our intentional efforts of minimizing the physical, psychological, or social harm of an event or situation. We have alluded in the previous slides about 2 levels of coping with stress. Okay, and what are these 2 levels of coping with stress? The first one is called problem-focused coping, and this is the kind of coping aimed at resolving the stressful situation or event, or altering the source of stress. Okay, another type of coping is what they call emotion-focused coping. And this coping is aimed at managing the emotions associated with the situation rather than changing the situation itself. Okay, now there's a third level of coping, and that is what we call meaning-focused coping. So we can also use meaning-based coping strategies to see us through our difficulties. Okay, in essence, meaning-based coping is an appraisal-based coping in which the person draws on his or her beliefs, for example, their religious or spiritual beliefs, their beliefs about justice, their values, and their existential goals, or put simply, existential goals are those goals around our purpose in life or our guiding principles. So we draw on these beliefs to help motivate us and sustain our coping and well-being during a difficult time. So after being aware of our thoughts and concerns and writing them down, as we did in the first section, right, in acceptance and awareness, meaning-focused coping may require us to examine and challenge our thoughts, as they might be long-standing beliefs that stop us. Example of these thoughts may be, I can't do this, or I'm too old for this. There is nothing I can't do. I won't be able to cope. Once we encounter a thought, specifically an emotion-provoking thought, here are some questions to ask ourselves. Number one, is this thought true? How do I know it's true? Is it 100% and always true? What is the evidence for the thought or against the thought? So I'm currently taking an online course from U of T, and it's called Innovative Evidence-Based Strategies for Supporting Family Caregivers. One of the required readings cited included spirituality and religious beliefs and self-efficacy beliefs as one of the individual uh, caregiving factors, that affect stress and response and health. So let's talk more about these 2 points. We talk about self-efficacy, which, as I said, it's our ability, our belief in our ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplishing a task. In studies among family caregivers, those with high or positive self-efficacy beliefs would actively assume the caregiving role, persist in providing care, they experience less distress, and require less support in maintaining their own health. However, those with low or negative self-efficacy beliefs expressed more stress, depression, and anxiety, all of which would inhibit appropriate and sustained action taking. Now, with regards to spirituality and religious beliefs, there were also some neuropsych studies or neuropsychological studies that have shown that those who regularly practice religion and even engage in contemplative traditions like meditation and prayer, they change the circuits in their brain involved in the regulation of emotion and attention. Okay, I'd like to cite a specific research wherein they found that even religion without a contemplative aspect or element can change certain brain circuit. And this is a study done by Dr. Michael Inslicht. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's from U of T, or University of Toronto, and his work focuses on a brain wave generated by the front section of our brain. Okay, now this brain wave, they found it spikes when people make mistakes. They call this spikes, okay, error-related negativity, or another term that they used to call it in their research studies, the uh-oh response. Okay, so the uh-oh response is like a cortical alarm bell, which when we make an error, it's being aroused, it spikes, and it causes anxiety. So in the study of Dr. Inslicht, okay, and they published this in a journal in 2010, they measured the uh-oh response with their participants while they were performing a certain task. And even though all of the study participants made mistakes, this brain firing or the error-related negativity firing was less strong or less intense in people with more religious zeal and greater belief in God. In a second set of studies published also in 2010, Dr. Inslicht and his colleagues tested whether people who were born with a lower ERN response, or the spiking response, gravitate towards religion, or they wanted to ask whether religion actually lowers this uh-oh response. They asked participants to write about religion or something that makes them happy, and they found that those who wrote about religion had, they had a lower ERN response, suggesting that religion dampens anxious responses. Dr. Inslicht believes that religion's effect may come from its ability to make people calmer overall by explaining phenomena that we don't understand. Now, relating it back to my caregiving experience or caregiving journey, my belief in God and His promises gave me the peace and strength I very much needed back then. Just allow me, just to conclude this section, to just share one verse that helped me a lot. And it's found in John 16:33 of the Bible, and it says, according to the Living Bible translation, I have told you all this so that you will have peace of heart and mind. It says, here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but cheer up, for I have overcome the world. So that concludes our section on B for belief. Okay. If there are any questions or concerns, I'm happy to address them. But if not, we'll move on to C, and then we'll find time later on towards this, towards the end to talk about your comments and questions. Now, C, okay, is all about many things. Caring for yourself is one, okay? I don't need to be a fortune teller to tell you that self-care is essential now and always. The Mental Health Commission of Canada says in one of their articles, and I quote, "Self-care is non-negotiable for caregivers. Although, like many, you may be inclined to put your own needs last, you need to take care of yourself before you can effectively support another person. So whether that means walking in nature, sleeping in, listening to music, or anything else to improve your well-being, self-care is integral to caring for someone else." So again, like the oxygen mask instructions on an airplane, what's that? You must secure your own oxygen supply first before turning to help others. Okay? So another C that we need to talk about at this point is what we call circle of care or circle of supports and creating a contingency plan. Okay? In order to effectively care for yourself and your loved one, you need to learn to ask for help. We also need to prepare a contingency plan or a backup plan should you become ill or need to self-quarantine. Having a plan helps relieve some of the stress, but we must not wait for ourselves to get sick before we ask for help. We need to expand our circle of support and ask trusted members of our family or friends if they can step in to help if needed. Okay, again, our family, our friends, we must, know that they're not gods. They can't read our minds. So it would be helpful if we document the types of care that we provide, for example, medication, feeding, etc., so that, someone who may be stepping in can easily reference and provide the care that is necessary. Also, keeping a list of all doctors and other healthcare providers in one place would also be helpful. Ensuring that medical records, healthcare journal binders, if you have one, and other documentation is easily accessible so that the members of your circle of care or support will know where to find them. Okay, here in this next slide, you will find another tool which might help you around planning for self-care. And again, this is from Mental Health Commission of Canada. And you can access this tool by clicking the link below, as you can see. And again, if you can't access it, let me know and I will be forwarding you the resource. Okay. So here's another resource that I want to share with you. It's a book called Share the Care. This is also a highly recommended book for caregivers to build their circle of supports. You can buy this online or borrow it from the library. I guess the library has a copy. And again, it's called Share the Care, How to Organize a Group to Care for Someone Who's Seriously Ill. And it's written by Cappy Caposella and Sheila Warnock. I don't know these people, but again, I heard this is a good book. Okay, another book that I would like to share with you, but this one, you don't necessarily need to buy it or read it. It's actually a children's book, and I just thought of sharing with you because this is a good segue into our next topic, which is around resilience. Okay, so this book called Hugging Tree tells a story of a little tree growing all alone on a cliff by a vast and mighty sea. Through thundering storms and the cold of winter, the tree holds fast. Sustained by the natural world and the kindness of kindness and compassion of one little boy, eventually this tree grows until it can hold and shelter others. So I like this story because it's a story of resilience. It's a story of the resilience of the hugging tree, and it calls to mind the potential in all of us, and that is to thrive despite times of struggle and difficulty, to nurture this little spark of hope and resolve to dream and grow where we are. And this leads me to talk about the next basic component of caregiver wellness. So, D stands for drawing upon your resilience. Again, the Mental Health Commission of Canada advises caregivers to do this in such a time as this. So they said being a caregiver requires or takes great resilience. Okay? Reflect on your journey thus far and remind yourself what you have overcome to get to this point. While COVID-19 has caused unprecedented global disruption, it's important that as a caregiver, this is not the first time you've had to adjust to your routine. In fact, you're probably more adaptable than most of us, or most who haven't had a caregiving journey experience, right? So take comfort and muster strength knowing that you've gone through similarly difficult times and you overcame and withstood hardships. Okay? So the last basic component of caregiver wellness, which we are going to talk about, is around our expectations. This may include our expectations of ourselves and our expectations of others, whether they be our care recipient or the people who are supporting us. When we fall short of our expectations with ourselves, we get frustrated, right? And we likewise would feel the same when others don't meet our expectations of them. As a caregiver, we tend to still have very high expectations of our loved one with dementia, for example. We tend to remember how they did before the disease, and we tend to forget that the disease is progressive, making their daily behaviors increasingly difficult and challenging. On top of these, in light of our current situation with COVID-19, we want you to expect some challenges from your loved one or from your care recipient. The combination of stress and uncertainty from the pandemic may mean that current mental health problems will worsen or new ones will form. Escalating symptoms, when coupled with personal fear or anxiety, could make caregiving much more challenging in the months to come. If it does, just remind yourself that any worsening of symptoms, as challenging as it may be, is natural for such trying circumstances. As I conclude this section on ABCs of caregiver wellness, or experience, our expectations, so far, let us remember the power of love. Okay, love can be defined and expressed in so many ways, but for now, I hope that in all our interactions, let us remember to L, listen. Listen to what others may or may not say. Listen to yourself, to what your body tells you. O is to overlook or forgive, right? Be forgiving even of yourself, right? And others. V stands for value, or V means to value. Value the person or the persons around you. Value your relationships. Value the persons around you for who they are and not just for what they can do for you. And finally, E stands for encourage. These are truly tough times for everyone, and a word of encouragement can go a long way. I'd like to share with you a video at this point, but I guess we don't have much time. But if you want, there is a beautiful caregiving video you can find on YouTube, and it's around a couple wherein the husband is actively caring for his wife, who is an emergency nurse in Wuhan, and she contracted COVID virus herself. Okay, again, please check it out. If you can't find the link, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to share that video with you. Okay, so we're now with our Q&A. And if you have any questions, please turn on your mics, or if you're shy, just type it in our chat box. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for your questions, and I hope you were helped by the answers that we shared with each other. So if you have more questions than you can think of today, please feel free to email them, and we at SCHC Caregiver Wellness Team, we will try our best to get back to you with the answers. So lastly, either again using your mic or the chat box, or maybe if you want to just send me an email later, I want to ask you this last and final question. So I want to ask how this workshop has been helpful to you. Yeah, I hope it's been helpful to you. And if it is helpful to you, please share one key takeaway from today's workshop. Okay. So again, as I move along, I just want to share with you the references that I used, okay? And in this next slide, these are the links to my photo credits for your own review. Okay. So before we totally end this workshop, I just would like to end by thanking you so much for being with me today. And before we end our time together, let me tell you about SCHC's programs, especially our Caregiver Wellness programs. So Caregiver Wellness is one of the 38 programs at SCHC, and what we do is we focus on the holistic health and well-being of caregivers. And our hope is to boost community connections, to reduce isolation among caregivers, and a big thing is also to reduce their caregiver related stresses. Okay, our target audience are caregivers who work with older adults, or those who are frail, living with a disability or chronic health conditions. And we serve caregivers from Steeles in the north, Lake Ontario in the south, Victoria Park in the west, and the Pickering Town Line in the east. Our specific programs include social work and counseling. So we have a social worker that you can connect with. You just simply have to connect with our intake, and then they will make a referral to our social worker. If that's for a new client. Otherwise, if you've been with us at SCHC for a long time, you can connect with our social worker, directly. We also have professional and peer-led support groups. We also have caregiver education and support groups. We also regularly hold health and wellness workshops. And I just want you to know that we have a language-specific programming. Currently, we have one around Tamil-speaking caregivers. Okay, SCHC, as I mentioned, offers many different programs. Caregiver wellness is just one of them. So we offer community health supports. We have primary care, hospice care, palliative care, bereavement, diabetes prevention and education, health and wellness education, and we also have an interprofessional primary care team. We also have community support services. So there's food bank, clothing banks, and it's especially designed for those who are newcomers and who are vulnerable residents of Scarborough. And also, SCHC have what we call senior support. So under this, caregiver wellness falls. So other than caregiver wellness, we have an adult day center, an active living center, a friendly visiting program, home help, Meals on Wheels, transportation or medical transportation services, and we also have senior health programs and education. So that's it. Please know that SCHC is here to help you. And should at some point you want to help us in return, here's how. So you can volunteer by connecting with volunteer program at SCHC Ontario. You can also apply online. That's the link. You can also donate or fundraise and tell your friends about us. You can connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And that's it. So thank you so much for being with me today in this topic entitled Caregiver Wellness During Unprecedented Times. Again, this is Joanne, and hoping to, see you one more time. Okay, all the best and take care. Bye.